I'm Diane Barrett. This is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. And we're in Los Angeles, California, and we're meeting today with the BE Collection with a legal panel. I'd like to thank all our participants, and I'm excited to do this. We've never tried anything like this, so we'll do our own experimentation, of course. Karen Matier has offered to be the moderator. I appreciate that. And I'll start by introducing people, and then I'd like you to say your qualifications or your background, actually. I'll start with Sherry Jones. Where are you residing, Sherry?
I'm in El Paso, Texas, and so I'm not in LA. Mm-hmm. Attorney at law, and my last position was with the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services as their associate counsel.
Tony Livingston, how about you, Tony?
Yes, my last position was the manager and cash vault manager and senior vice president at Bank of America. So I've had about 38 years of banking experience.
Thank you. And Karen?
And I'm Karen Matier. I'm an attorney at law, recently retired, and was in private practice for the entirety of my career, and did also had a combination estate trusts and probate type practice, and also was a tax person. So I combined both.
This is the BE Collection. I'm Diane Barrett, and this is my spouse and partner in the collection, Margaret Elfring. And you'd like to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm here as a questioner of all of our legal advice. I'm a physician, an orthopedic surgeon. On the 25th woman in the United States to ever be board certified as an orthopedist.
The BE Collection is a collection of interviews of lesbians about their careers. We do, from time to time, special panels. We've done one on palliative care and hospice, conversion therapy, and we have an upcoming one on the Holocaust. How this comes together, I don't know. So many people bring information that is very interesting. So our goal is to disperse it. And that's what we're doing today. So Karen, do you want to take?
All righty. Preliminary housekeeping type things. Anytime you have a panel that has attorneys on it, of course, there's always got to be some sort of a general disclaimer. And as Sherry noted, she's in Texas. We're in California. The law is different in different states on certain things, and especially in my area of estates and trusts, that is totally state specific. And obviously, too, the information Tony's going to provide, same thing. You know, she's in California, although some of those things are more uniform. So the general disclaimer, and there will be, I'm sure, a written disclaimer at the end of this tape, is that, you know, we're expressing our own opinions. We're expressing knowledge as we know it, but it is not to be construed as legal advice and or financial advice for that matter. You should obviously check with your own personal professional. And with that, do we want to start, Sherry, with yours?
That's fine. Are we glad to? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit today about how to obtain.
That's good. Fine.
We're good.
Thank you.
Okay, how to obtain a U.S. visa for a same-sex spouse. Most of my career, I worked with immigration law, and so this is relying on that. I'm going to discuss just how you go about the steps to get a same-sex spouse into the United States as either a fiance or as your spouse. The first section I was going to talk about is when you're anticipating a marriage. If you have a same-sex fiance in a different country, you have to go to the embassy or consulate there and apply for a visa for that fiance. When the visa is approved, you have to make sure all other immigration requirements are met. In other words, you might have to do a physical or make sure you have all the other forms with your I's dotted and your T's crossed. Once that's approved, the same-sex engagement will be allow the fiance to enter the United States as a fiance. After the marriage, the Department of Homeland Security will give you about 2 years in that status, and then they'll have you back in to make sure the marriage is still a valid marriage. A lot of you have probably seen movies like The Proposal, where someone just has a spouse come in for the purpose of, getting a green card, as they call it, a lawful permanent resident card, and it's not a valid marriage. It's just for that purpose. Throughout this process, the Department of Homeland Security is always going to look to see if the marriage is valid, and if to make sure everything about it is kosher, if you will.
How do they assess that?
How do they test that?
Mm-hmm.
You go in, you have separate interviews with a person, and then they'll bring you back together. They ask you questions about, are you living together? Have you been separated during this period? Have there been any divorces, annulments, long separations that you meant to continue? Did you actually go through with the marriage? If you're doing the fiance visa, and that sort of thing. So they actually have a meeting with the Department of Homeland Security to reiterate that it's valid marriage. The second type of way to get your spouse in is when the spouse is already married to you. Say you have a same-sex spouse that you married in Mexico. Then there's several things there you have to also to make sure. The marriage must be valid in whatever state or country it took place. Invalid marriages are like bigamy, polygamy, that sort of thing. They'll look for that. You do not have to live in the same state where you got married. The applicant can also be approved for a derivative status. In other words, once they get approved, to be your fiance, or if you've been married, then that person can apply for work, apply for a lawful permanent resident card, and that sort of thing. Slow me down, ask me questions.
This is something I don't know anything about.
Yeah.
And I have heard about, people trying to say they're married so they can.
Yeah, of course. That's what we usually hear, the bad instead of the good.
So is it a problem? I would assume that it is a problem, or someone like you wouldn't be working with it.
It's absolutely a problem. You can imagine there are only a certain number of visas for every country. And I give the example of Mexico because I worked along the Mexican-US border here in Texas a lot. And the number of visas you only had a certain number, and then it was capped for that year. So the visa for a fiance or a spouse is not capped. In other words, you could get in as long as you had one of those. A civil union or domestic partnership is not considered by by the Homeland Security to be a legally married. So that does not confer any status. So it has to be an engagement, and you have to prove that you're going to go through with the marriage, or you have to actually be married.
You actually work with lesbian couples?
I have seen them, yes.
Uh-huh. How frequent was it?
I did not see a lot of lesbian couples, but when they would come through, when I initially started working with the Department of Homeland Security, it seemed like to me the officers were very tough on them to make sure that it was a good and valid marriage. Lanes have loosened up. It's easier to get in. People are getting more accustomed to seeing us there. And so it has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
A divorce or annulment will render the marriage invalid, and that'll take away the classification.
How long is that? In other words, if you went through
you've got 2 years, Marge. That 2 years seems to be the magic number, and then they kind of leave you alone, and you're able to, after that period, also to apply for citizenship once they determine that it's a valid marriage, and you jump that hoop. As far as a transgender spouse, they're allowed to be treated as a same-sex fiance or spouse as long as they have a birth certificate, passport, or a court order, a medical certification showing the change of gender by a medical doctor. They have to have their name changed, and it must be completed by the relevant state or country where they had the gender operation.
They hire people to help them? That sounds pretty elaborate.
Yes, there are private attorneys that this is all they do, and I would think, and well, I know like in San Francisco, there was a tremendous number of attorneys that did that sort of work, just for gays and lesbians.
Mm-hmm. What made you go into this direction in your career? What made you?
Well, I started out just doing it with the government, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which was a forerunner to the Department of Homeland Security. And I have job will travel, as they say. So I just kind of looked into that job and continued to take steps up. So this was just where I was when I finished my tour. Evidence of a reassignment surgery is not required. So a person doesn't have to come in and show that. But if they have medical certification, that can be used as their required documentation, and no further evidence of the surgery will be needed. So the bottom line is they're always going to be looking towards the validity of a marriage or of a relationship if you come in as a fiance. So there's a couple of ways to get in. You'll be dealing with Citizenship and Immigration Services, which the initials are USCIS. And I would always recommend you get a private attorney to deal with them, because it's forms and as you can tell, quite a few hoops to jump through.
Sherry, what types of information do they require to prove the engagement? I mean, a ring isn't going to cut it. I can't imagine.
they do bring in stuff like that. You'd be amazed, Karen. I've seen pictures of the engagement party, family pictures where the citizen is down with her family or his family, you know, and they take just about anything. If they've been married, you know, in Mexico, they'll of course look at that certificate.
Right.
A lot of times they'll get remarried, you know, they have friends or family in the United States, so they'll remarry there. So they look at all of that.
They're more broad-minded than I would have assumed, frankly. It sounds like.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I first started working some 16 and a half years ago, this was no, there was no way. That was just it. You'd ask them and it's just like, no.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way.
And have some more to come, but that sounds like progress.
Always.
When we don't lose anything that we've gained. Yeah.
That too.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Tony, did you have any questions for Sherry?
No, I didn't. It's very interesting, Sherry.
Thank you.
It sounds like it's a complicated process.
Yes.
Worse than taxes.
Yes.
Just about anything you deal with the government's going to be a complicated process, as you know. So.
Good.
I'll come back to you, but let's start with Tony.
All right. Well, what I was going to cover today was checking accounts, savings accounts, and banking relationships for either same-sex married couples or just living as partners, and kind of the different pros and cons of how to set up a, you know, the family checking account versus their own personal accounts. And from my experience, is that usually each partner has a little bit of a different spending habits, and that can result in a lot of conflict.
Never.
I'm glad Sherry's not here.
One of the things that I did when I was with my partner was that we had a separate checking or a joint checking account for all of the household mortgage payments, utilities, and whatever else we needed. And then each of us had our own separate account, so we could, you know, spend as we wished. One of the issues with having a joint account, though, is that either party can withdraw money and, you know, without telling the other partner. So there has to be some trust there. But there's also ways that you can monitor it. And I'm kind of old, I'm very old school. And I usually balance all my checking accounts when I get the statement. The other benefit of that, which is time consuming, is that you can identify if there's any kind of fraud going on in the account. And if you're on the online banking, usually just reviewing that would be able to, you know, give you give you a heads up that there was something fishy going on. And one of the things I had at one point, just personally, is I had taken my aunt and a couple of cousins out to dinner, and I used a credit card. When I got home, I discovered there was like a $500 charge on there that was unrelated to anything I had done. So I was able to call the bank and get that straightened out. But you need to do that promptly. I was looking through one of my accounts yesterday, and usually you only have 30 days, sometimes 60, from the date your statement came out. So it's a good idea to review that at least once a month. Make sure that there's no fraud going on. Then there's of course other types of checking accounts. If a couple wanted to save for vacation, they could use a joint savings account or money market account for that. But anything that you put in together, it's 50-50, or one person could take all of it. So that's March.
I was going to say, I'm not very good at that sort of thing. So I've always kept a savings or two checkings account, one inflow and one outflow. That way I don't forget, how you write a check and you don't put it down in there, and then you don't know if it's what your account really is because it's going in and out all the time.
Right.
So I know the stuff in the outflow account has been spent, and the inflow account is there for my use. But yeah, Diane has her own account, checking account. And I have mine.
But they're all joint accounts.
They're all joint accounts. Yeah, she can get into, or I can get into any of them. But basically, as you go through life, for some reason, you attract various companies that deposit to an account. And sometimes then you go do something else and you don't want it there. So it becomes its own account after a while, where it's deposited to regularly by some, usually governmental agency. And so I wind up with a bunch of accounts.
Yeah, well, and that's a one way to do it, especially, it's whatever works for anybody, as long as you keep an eye on it to make sure, like the outflow account, that outflow is only what you were taking out.
What I was going to ask is passwords, because so many people now do everything totally online. Deposits are online, and if one of the partners becomes incapacitated, if it's all online, it's sometimes hard to actually know unless everybody's aware of each other's passwords and that sort of thing. Right. What's your feeling about that?
Well, I have my niece on my account as a power of attorney, but she doesn't have the password. So, and not that I don't trust her, it's just I've never thought about giving it to her, because she can write a check if she needed to. So, but you're right, many people don't even have checks. Mm-hmm. So
especially the younger ones don't. I mean,
right. And for my niece, I know she doesn't reconcile her account. That is it's like foreign to younger people. So sometimes maybe putting out a secure password somewhere, and I don't know if as far as putting it in a safe deposit box, a little extreme, but I don't know. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, typically, it is old school to write it down, but again, if it's not someplace, it makes it very difficult. And I'm in a position at the moment where I'm a co-trustee for somebody who died actually last week, and she took as gospel the fact that you needed different passwords for everything, and every password was about 12 feet long, and it was absolutely nothing you would ever be able to determine on your own. And she ended up having a stack of, and I'm not exaggerating, a stack of 3x5 cards about like that, with the various and sundry passwords. The problem was, as she got more ill, she would get a statement online because that's all she had. And every time she got it, she wouldn't necessarily remember how to get into it. So then she would change her password and didn't update the cards. So at the moment, we're frozen out of, I don't know, probably $70,000 worth of assets someplace that, it'll take another 40 days plus before we'll be able to access, because nobody knows how to reach it.
So what happens in that case?
I can talk about that during the legal part. I mean, you can get to it. It just takes
I'm
a
a
while.
multiple password person.
Well, I do recommend that there's some way somebody can find it. because I know I've got all kinds of accounts and all kinds of passwords. And trust me, there is no way on this planet my partner's going to have any idea, probably even how to access it. But I do have it all written down, and I actually keep one set with my estate stuff with some instructions because I know somebody's going to need it.
Right. I have mine written down, but I'm like your deceased client.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of 3x5 cards,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't use a very long password because my memory is not that good.
Well, that's why I don't either.
I have a long list of passwords.
Yeah, mine.
If you start putting in the password because they're asking for it, then it's not the right one. Then pretty soon they say, well, who is this person? They just cut you off.
Yeah.
Yes.
They don't care if it's your
Yes.
father's birthday or whatever.
And my cousin, when she retired, she spent like 2 weeks resetting all her accounts to put it all on one password. And I don't have the patience for that.
Well, and the next time you go into that they won't accept that password. And pretty soon you have back to 50 passwords.
Exactly.
It's just mind-boggling.
But look at that can of worms you opened, Karen.
I think they should
I'm
have
sorry.
where you can look into the camera and it sees the inside of your eye.
Yeah.
Yes, that's new.
Oh yeah.
They had it for years in the hospital just to park your car almost.
Mm-hmm.
And they stopped it.
They stopped it for some reason.
Well, the other issue with passwords in general or online access, for instance, Tony, do you still get paper statements?
Yes.
Only not for my checking account.
Uh-huh. And in the good old days, when you used to get statements, if nothing else, once a year, you'd probably get something at the end of the year for tax season. And now with online access, there are times when you won't even know what account somebody has because they don't get those either. So unless you have access to their email and know what accounts and all the rest, it can create quite a number of issues.
Well, and especially for seniors.
Yes.
Right now I volunteer to do taxes for seniors through AARP, and I'm IRS certified. But some of them, if you ask them to look something up on the computer, they look like, you've grown an extra head or something, because they don't, it's frightening to them. And I think the whole, our whole generation, because there's a lot of seniors that just, it frightens them.
Very much so.
The computers and passwords and all that. So there's got to be a way, but usually they have a relative help them, and that can work, but you have to trust them.
Yep.
So,
Kara, do you do your parents' taxes?
I actually am on my dad's every account he's got, and that's a lot of trust. Because he did not let loose till just recently of those, but he's put me on all of his accounts and stuff. So yeah, and we get somebody to help him with his taxes.
Yeah, I had took care of my mother's. It was the same way, Terry. It took a long time for her to let me take care of it,
Right?
because she just couldn't keep up anymore.
Right. And they'll ask for you to do something online, and my father and mother went through 3 floods, and after the 3rd flood of their home, they moved, and my dad didn't get a computer, so now his answer to anything that anybody asked him about a computer is it went with the flood. So you'll have to talk to my daughter.
Right.
He just refuses to even get. He's got an iPad, but he won't use it even. So
Yeah.
Well, you know how they always ask you for your email?
right.
And I always tell them I'm obsolete. I don't have one because I don't want to give it out.
That's him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my sister does, she's 5 years younger than me. She doesn't have an email because she doesn't want anybody to know anything.
Mhm.
And I said, you get Social Security, right? Goes into your checking account, right? I said, they know about you. Oh,
Yes.
no.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, do you find with particularly your seniors, I know as I was doing taxes, it was the same problem, and we had shifted to everything being filed online
Right.
because that's what the IRS wants. And once you have over a certain number of clients, you have to do it legally now anyway. But same issue, I would have people say, well, I don't want them to know any of this. And I would either ask, are you getting Social Security? Are you getting your paycheck, auto deposited? Are you doing, any number of things? And usually the answer to all that is yes. And just as Tony said, I mean, it's not like that's, if you think that there's privacy, I got news for you, there really isn't. It's the illusion of privacy more than actual ability to. But
You're right, it's an illusion.
But
Well,
does
and-
that worry you? Does that worry you in today's conflicts?
No, you know what? I kind of have either they've beaten me down or I've just resolved it that I have to just keep an eye on things.
Right.
That's all that's all I can do. I can't, to me, I don't want to run around being paranoid. And I do a lot of my own personal banking online.
I do too.
I do print out a statement
Right.
because I have I have rental property. So I have, I like to keep track of that for taxes and so forth. But even with me doing taxes for seniors, IRS is recommending us, to have, if they get a refund, to have it deposited into
Sure.
a checking account. But we have some that just, they want a check.
Yeah.
Of course, now the post office is starting to be an issue.
Yes.
It's a crapshoot whether you're going to get the check or not.
Or what year it's going to come.
Yes.
Has been part of the problem now too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They expect you to write the check for them after the taxes are.
No,
That's good.
IRS will mail them the check. No.
They're pretty good about it.
Pardon?
I've found the IRS to be pretty good about getting their refund checks out.
Yes.
A lot better than the state.
Well,
The
I've
state
heard of
California's-
a couple of problems, but not with ones that we're doing.
I've got it online as well. If my dad goes to the store, it notifies me that he's been to the store and how much he spent because he uses his debit card, which he loves. But he says somebody might scam me any day now. I'm an old man, so
Right.
keep an eye out on that.
That's good.
So,
And that's a good point, Cherry, because a lot of the banks will set up where if there's over a certain amount that comes out of your account, they'll text you or call you.
right.
And I usually, if when I was traveling, I would let the bank know that I'm going to be out of the country or I'm going
Yes.
to be out of state.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you could be stuck without money.
You're right.
Oh,
So, no, they're getting better.
Yeah.
I did get some kind of a scam. I never figured it out. That the way I was notified was because my, what do you call that thing where they Experian, where they tell you, give you a rating, and it started to fall for no reason I knew, except, yes, do I leave 200 or 2,950 whatever on my emails? Yeah, I do. It clouds up. And I found that someone had purchased something using my email as
Xbox.
an Xbox and something else.
In Paris.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it was about $1,400.
Right.
And number one, I don't play games on my computer, so I don't know what an Xbox is or anything else. But basically, the entire event had been somehow accomplished through email. Never a signature, never anything.
Yeah.
It's
And
amazing.
how did you resolve it?
I just called that bank, which I'd never heard of, and told them I never had heard of them. I'd never signed any document with them. And away we went. It seems to be taken care of now because Experian has taken them off their list.
Somewhere along the line too, somebody said that the Xbox is a target that they use many times when they're doing this thievery stuff. Why? I don't know. But,
Huh.
oh yeah, the Xbox
Easy to sell.
must be.
It's easy to sell. And I bought an Apple computer for a grandnephew as he was getting ready to go to college. And my credit card company stopped payment because they had noted that I had only bought PCs and not an Apple. And again, Apple products at the time, especially, were being targeted. So I say, no, really, that's for the kid.
Yeah.
And good credit card companies, frankly, will note if something's out of the ordinary, or if it's an extraordinary amount. And just as Tony said, notifying them before you travel, or if you're going to make a big purchase. Because it hadn't occurred to me to call them to tell them I was going to go buy a computer.
Well, we've had good luck with your previous employer, Tony. Bank of America has stopped payment on credit card amounts a couple of times that were fraud, and then just sent us new cards.
Right. Yeah, their security is improving.
Yeah.
Definitely getting better.
I was just shocked that they could get it done all through email.
Yeah.
And this bank apparently doesn't do anything but computerized stuff.
Well, with Bank of America, with Bank of America, my account, I have a user ID, and then I have a password. So it's not, unless I don't use my email for that.
Mm-mm.
But I suppose you could if you wanted, but I don't know if you want me to touch on any tax issues.
Sure.
Just briefly, and Karen, maybe you can help me out.
Sure.
If I get too deep in the woods here. Basically, I wanted to talk about filing your tax return. As a married couple, it is best if you file as a joint return. And there's a couple of reasons for that, is that the standard deductions are better for married couple than if you would file married filing separately. And most of the time, people that are filing separately is because there's a separation or pending divorce. The only other reason that I've seen, and this was not in lesbian couples, but straight couple, or the husband owed child support and the wife from a previous marriage, and the current wife didn't want to have to pay for it. So I'm not sure how legal that is. So Karen, you might want to.
Well, and I think what people don't understand about married filing separately is that to file that way, you're supposed to add together the income from both spouses and divide it in two. And that's true even if you're getting a divorce, assuming you know what the other party's making. And that usually comes as a rather large shock to people, because they assume I'll just take what's mine and you take what's yours and we'll merrily go on our way. And that's actually not the state of the law. So the IRS would assume that in a marriage, if it's married filing separately, that you would do that. Plus, you also aren't able to take certain deductions the same way. Or if one person can't itemize their personal expenses and the other take a standard deduction. And there's an impact also for child tax credits if you do married filing separately. So generally speaking, it's not what you want to do, but there are certain situations. Now, back in the day when California had registered partners and before there was federal recognition of marriages, that necessitated basically, 3 tax returns. Because you would do the state tax return, or you do the federal tax return, basically as separate individuals, but the state recognized the marriage. And so, it would cause you to have different statuses depending on either the state return or the federal.
I
Then
think we
at
filed
some
three-
point,
I think we
Pardon me?
filed 3 tax returns at
Yes.
some point.
yeah, it's yours, mine, and ours.
Yeah.
And then what was actually the state of the law, according to the IRS, is since we're a community property state, you would do the same thing you would if it was married filing separately, which is add the incomes together. You each would take half of it on your own separate single tax return, but then you took the joint amount as a married filing jointly on the state return. And I can't tell you how many clients would get letters from the IRS saying, why did you only declare half of your income? Because you'd have a W-2 that would say you made, 50,000 and you got 25 on one return, 25 on another. And they didn't know the state of the law. So frankly, when everybody started being married instead of being registered partners, it was a great relief. And when the federal recognition
Was for the
Nice.
partners too.
because the returns were just really complicated and miserable, and almost always there would be some letter from the IRS at some point about why the return was done the way it was.
That must be why they're out of, married filing separate is out of scope for us.
Yes. Yep.
So that's about all I have for checking, and unless somebody else you want to add.
I'd like to add something. In our lifetime, women were not allowed to
Right.
carry on the expense, have credit or these are all changes that have occurred. When my sister got a divorce, it was a real big hassle because of this.
Having accounts.
That's right. She
That's a
had
good point.
Well, and in my lifetime, when I worked for B of A,
for women.
same issue. And I was getting a divorce, and this would have been in 70 something or another. And I was working at the lost and stolen and fraud department of B of A credit cards. And my boss was a divorced woman who said, because I was an employee, I could have my own account and my own credit at B of A and to open it because she knew I was having trouble with the marriage. And so she, said, open it up now, get it going. And I could only have it that way in my own name because I was an employee, which, admittedly, we're now talking over 50 years ago, but still, it's it's still within one's lifetime, and you forget how far we've come, how much
Yeah,
things
I
have
know.
changed.
I was shocked. I was reading something about the quote Napoleonic Code,
Mhm.
and I'd never heard of that.
Well, if you lived in Louisiana, you would have.
Well,
She didn't.
I didn't, and I was shocked to know that Napoleon ripped all of the ability of women to handle their own economics right off. Bang, it's gone. You don't have it. Was done, and we didn't get it back until the 1940s, 30s, before we got
Depending
it.
on where and what, but yeah.
Right.
Where you can have, but where you can even have a bank account, you can even own property. So now we're really way ahead of the game because we have our bank accounts. Always I had a bank account when I was 5 years old.
B of A, they used to do that.
Savings,
Had
remember
all
that?
the savings in the schools, yeah.
Once a week or.
The little envelopes.
Uh-huh.
And actually, the manager of the bank was my trustee because I didn't want anybody else
For good reason.
for good reasons.
There you
And
go.
he was always my good buddy. At my senior year in medical school, he gave me a telephone call and he said, "Your tuition check has bounced. Almost went through the ceiling." Then he said, "You didn't move the money because of my movement from the inflow to the outflow." That interfered with.
So much for your
But
banking idea.
Yeah, but he was one of my staunch friends because I knew him all the way through. And it
Well,
was
that's one thing. It's kind of too bad, the dying art of actually knowing a banker, because
Yeah.
there is a lot to be said for that. And for those of us that have had the good fortune to have a personal banker, if you will, at some point, it makes a big, big difference.
Yes.
In
We've
Santa
done-
Maria, we had that. It was wonderful.
we had a banker.
Here, it's a nightmare.
Mhm.
They don't care how much money you have in the account or who you are. It's really been difficult.
Moving here has been difficult banking wise.
Mhm.
And the first person I tried to develop a relationship with got moved to a different bank
Right.
or something. You know, they're all moving around. So it's difficult.
Yes.
Particularly with somebody like me who I was living here in California, and I called him up and I said, how do I get a loan for a car? He said, where do you want it put? Your savings account or your checking account?
Mhm.
I was borrowing to buy a car. He was just fine doing it over the phone.
Yeah.
Those days are gone.
Oh, I know. Oh my God.
Pretty much.
Yes.
So shall we move on to,
Yeah.
Your
now we've
turn.
done taxes, shall we go to death? Yeah, I always had to laugh because I said, since I did tax and estate planning, I did death and taxes. And there's one thing that we're always sure of, that does happen in our lives one way or the other. In my practice, I would highly recommend to everybody, and I don't care. People will come in and say, they're of a certain age that, well, we thought we were getting to a point in our lives where we ought to have estate documents. And my first question usually was, do you have children? And often the answer would be yes. I said the appropriate time would have been when you had those children, because those are the folks that need the care more than the rest of us. But in general, and I would say this for all people, if you have no other document on this planet, you need to have a healthcare power of attorney. You need it, often called a living will, sometimes called the 5 wishes. I mean, there are various iterations out in the universe, but having a designated person to make healthcare decisions for you is really rather crucial. And I would say, especially for my gay and lesbian clients, because often you weren't attached to your family, and there would be nothing worse on this planet than to be in an accident and have someone whom you love not be able to either see you make a medical decision or even have access. And it might revert to the parent who wanted to take you to conversion therapy, for instance, or some such. So, having a valid healthcare power of attorney is a truly important document to have. And you don't actually even need an attorney for that. Many doctors have the AMA standard form. If you happen to be a Kaiser person, they have their own form too. That said, it's really good to make sure that your person who is your healthcare power of attorney has a copy. What I have now done for either people for whom I have such documents, especially if there's a situation as they're either being ill or getting older or whatnot, I put them on a flash drive and kept it in my car, for instance. Or now, since you can do things on your iPhone, on your wallet or whatever, you may have a copy there. Because quite honestly, you don't know when you're going to need it, but you want it someplace where it's easily accessible. Going along with that, should everyone have a will? Well, it's helpful. It's very helpful. I mean, back in the days when, my assets consisted of, my guitar, my skis, and my bricks and board bookcase, it probably wasn't a huge issue. But as we do roll along, we do have additional assets. And a will is just basically a document that's going to indicate who is going to administer your estate when you pass, because it only takes effect when you don't. I mean, you have to be dead before anybody really cares about your will. So who would administer your estate, who gets what, and who gets anything that's left over, basically, and whether or not they have to have supervision when they do it. I mean, it can be very simple. The simplest will I think ever created was, all to my love or some such thing, or all to my wife. That's actually a valid will. In California, they come in different flavors. So you can actually have what's known as a holographic will, meaning handwritten. So if you handwritten, you can take out your little yellow pad and say, I, Karen Elmatier, give everything to my partner, blah, blah, sign it, date it, bam, perfectly legal.
Have to be notarized?
No, actually a notarized will in California has zero effect. Because we don't notarize wills in California. That isn't what we do. So that does not make it valid. People will do that thinking that makes it a valid document. It does not. I've had people, run something off the computer, fill in a couple of things and go get it notarized, and that's great, except it's not a valid will in California. The rule is that you have to, if it's a holographic will, it has to be the dispositive or the giving away parts have to be written by you. You have to have it signed. And all the notaries in the world won't fix that.
Can it be handwritten or can it be typed?
If it's typed, you've made a formal will.
Mhm.
And if you've made a formal will, you have to follow the legal California legalities. And in California, that means you have to have it witnessed by two disinterested parties, meaning two people who aren't going to benefit from your death. And again, signed and dated. The witnesses are supposed to be able to acknowledge the fact that you signed it and that they have to be in the same place at the same time. The trick is in California, there's special wording to make it what's known as a self-proving will, meaning that the people who witness it are going to acknowledge that they think you're over 18 and that they're doing it under the laws of the state of California and a couple of other little odds and ends. The interesting part is, and I found this out in Texas, you have to have one special bit that says that they have proved to you that they're over 18, because I actually had to appear as a witness for a probate for someone who had a trust, and I'll explain why we had to do a probate with a trust in a sec, because the California wording is slightly different than the Texas wording. Minding you that I always tell clients if they move out of state, they need to have it looked at by an attorney in that state, because again, this is the one area that is totally state driven by law.
The trust or the
Will. Well, anything.
Will.
Probate, the documents that I'm going to discuss, a healthcare power of attorney, a financial power of attorney, a will, a HIPAA authorization, I'll explain what that is in a bit, and also a trust are all under the California probate code or any state's probate code. And there are very few areas of the law, probate being one, and marital law basically being the other, that are totally state driven. So they may be similar, but they aren't identical. And I think people forget that. You know, they'll think that I did it here and it's going to be fine. And it may be, because we do recognize obviously the laws of different states, but there are times where there will be issues that do come up. So if you do anything, a will merely says who gets what, and that's all good and fine. But if you own real property in the state of California, or if you have assets in excess of $150,000, in other words, if I had a bank account from my lips to God's ears that had 150 grand in it, and it was only in my name, and I happened to die, those assets are sufficient enough that you would have to go through the probate process. And everybody has probably heard that word. Most people don't have a foggy clue what it is. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time a client said, yes, I don't want to have to give all of my assets to the court. Well, you know, no, you're going to give it to the attorneys, but, you know, not the court. But the purpose of probate is to clear title on assets so that the person, and also to watch out for minors, the kids, not the pickaxe guys, to make sure that minors are well protected and receive what they should receive, that creditors get properly paid, and that an estate is properly distributed. That's kind of the good news. The bad news is in California, you know, it's a bear of a process. Again, many forms, as Sherry had mentioned, you know, in her arena, that there are just so many forms to fill out. And it's very specific, the process that you have to go through in order to clear title. So in order to avoid that, many people in California have a living trust. And a living trust and inter vivos trust, a revocable trust, are all the same thing. And all that means is you create a document that acts kind of like a holding company, you know, if you will, for your assets. Not dissimilar to the concept of, you know, when you create a corporation, it's a different entity. Well, in a sense, your trust is a bowl that you build that holds all your stuff. And then you change title of things. So your bank account would be the Tony Livingston Trust of whatever the heck. Tony, as trustee, would hold her bank account, except for the ones that you've got your niece on. My house might be in the name of me as trustee of my trust. And by doing that, we have avoided the probate process because the trust will still exist even after I pass. And so therefore, there hasn't been a gap in the title. If for any of you who have ever owned real property, you get title insurance when you buy a piece of property. And that's to be sure that, you know, if I'm trying to sell something that it's really in my name and I can sell it to Sherry, for instance. And so the idea here is the trust fills that gap. There's always, the trust is still there, and in the document, it will explain who becomes the successor to the person who died. That's the good news. The bad news is there are people all over the place that will go to these, you go to a luncheon and for $800 or $700, you can go get yourself a living trust. And you can. And it's a perfectly valid document. But if the bowl isn't filled with your assets, you don't have anything other than paper and a notebook, probably. You have to actually change physically the title on these different assets to put them into the trust. And by doing so, you can create a way to manage assets on behalf of minor children, people with disabilities, or take care of partners. A lot of times people may have some stuff that they've inherited, or maybe a significant amount they've inherited from families, and they want to be sure their partner's well cared for. But maybe that asset, in fact, should go back to family other than the partner's family. And there are ways of doing that too. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Who determines whether it should go back to family or go to your partner?
Pardon me?
Who determines whether
the person who owns the asset? I mean, that's what I'm saying. If you do it in your trust, you would state, there are ways. I mean, you may just give it outright to the partner, and that's fine. I mean, that's perfectly fine, and obviously a wise choice sometimes. But, I've had issues too where someone has, maybe both partners have a fair number of assets anyway, so they don't really need the money. Might go back to other family members, or just some portion might go back to a specific family member. And you can do those sorts of things in a fashion that makes it clear and understandable with a trust. So, people sometimes just don't want to spend the money to go see an attorney, but trust me, any money you spend doing estate planning is going to cost you far less than any litigation after someone dies, because that's where the money starts being eaten up. And families may get along famously until a party dies, but interesting things can happen. I mean, we all have horror stories, I'm sure. One of my early ones in my career, I had a couple, and this was before you could have marriages. And in fact, it was before being registered partners meant much more than you could have a joint membership at a gym. But everybody was fine, and the mother and the two women were all very close, and one of the partners got breast cancer and was very ill, and the mother actually moved in with them, and they both did caregiving and whatnot, and her daughter died, which was all terribly sad. And time came for the partner to go back to work, and they had their tearful goodbyes because the mother-in-law, if you will, was going home. Well, when the partner got back to the house that night, half of the stuff in the house was gone too, because of course the mother decided it was perfectly appropriate to take her daughter's belongings because it's her daughter. And so it's one of those situations that people often recognize the partnership, and they may be fine with you on a personal level, but things shift, and upon the death of somebody, often things shift dramatically. So having proper documentation is key. Two other quick things. One
thing I was going to say is, we do have a trust, a family trust, but it was a relief actually to have a child, because then we know if there was any other arguments about money in either family, the child would take precedence. I don't recommend having children necessarily for that reason.
I was going to say there are other ways. You could just have good documents. But no, it's true. It does simplify things. And frankly, marriage helps. And I think there are several misnomers. The first of which is that getting married means you don't need documents. And that's not true. It is not true at all. One of the famous cases, and I'm going to blank on the woman's name, and I meant to write it down, many, many years ago, was the woman in Florida who had been in a terrible accident and was probably brain dead, but kept on life support. And it went through courts to determine whether or not she could have, be taken off life support. Well, she actually had a husband, but it was her parents who jumped in and said, no, and that had to go through the courts to decide who had the right to make a decision. And you would think a spouse would automatically have that right because they are legally next of kin. but it doesn't preclude having other people butt in.
The argument.
Power of attorney trumps that, you know, I mean, unless they would have to affirmatively prove that somebody had had their arm twisted 22 ways from sideways to get the document done before that would be overturned. So, you know, having documents in place is just prudent. So, you know, if you have a healthcare power of attorney, that's big. You should also have a financial power of attorney, which would allow you to act on behalf of another. They come in a couple of flavors also. Speaking of trust, this is a good one for you, Tony.
Want to say something, Sherry?
Yeah, Sherry.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was gonna say, just on your power of attorney, maybe you ain't got there yet. In California, do you have to file those with the clerk?
Actually, in California, we only file them with the county clerk if it's pertaining to a property matter.
Okay.
So if I were to buy and sell property on behalf of somebody, then it has to be filed with the clerk. So the ones that I drafted in years of yore would always have a space to put the little recorder stamp,
Yeah,
but you would not record it other than that particular issue.
right.
In California, we use two types, which all states don't, which is important to understand too, is we use what's called a springing power, meaning if I'm incapacitated and two doctors sign off that, you know, I really shouldn't be trusted making financial decisions, then, you know, whoever I've named can handle matters for me. Or we have what's called an immediate power, and that would say, you know, that I immediately name Tony Livingston as my person who can take matters or, you know, act on my behalf. Again, the misnomers are that people think if I sign a power of attorney, it means I no longer can do it, which isn't
Right.
true. You certainly can, with the exception of the springing power, because if two doctors think you're kind of out there, then no, you can't. But if it's an immediate power, it just means somebody else can do it on my behalf.
Right.
So if
We
I
had to
decide,
wrestle with my dad with that one too, but he signed.
that's one of those things. I'm not giving all that up. Well, no,
Yeah.
you're not giving it up. You're just allowing somebody to help you. You know, and the issue is, for instance, Pennsylvania does not recognize springing powers of attorney, and we had a situation with a woman who had been basically the family retainer, had worked with the family while the kids were growing up and then taking care of the parents. And she had named one of the kids that she'd taken care of as her power of attorney, you know, and by this time the kid was 40. So, you know, he was perfectly a reasonable choice, and they'd had a relationship low these many years. Well, after the parents died, and this woman was in her late 80s at this point, her family in Pennsylvania, with whom she'd had precious little contact, came in and said, well, you need to live with us. And she was developing some memory issues. So off she went to Pittsburgh. And they immediately did not want him to have anything to do with her any which way. And in Pennsylvania, they don't recognize springing powers of attorney. They only recognize immediate powers of attorney. So they did an immediate power, which I was going to say trumped, and I really hate to say that, but trumped her right to, you know, use the power. And he was shut out completely, and basically shut out of her life by doing that. So, you know, it's important to understand that, again, these are state driven. So you need to know what documents you need in what state, because you can think you have it all taken care of it and not.
Yeah, we did. My mom got dementia. And before she got to where she didn't know where she was, we went ahead and did those documents for both she and my dad. But it was like pulling teeth with my dad, because he was, like you said, he thought that just meant I was going to take over and set him out in the street, you know.
Well, you know, and unfortunately, there are people that do. I mean, you know, it's not an unfounded fear. You know, and that's the hard part. And I think also the other thing that often happens with folks in general is, you know, I would get calls all the time from the concerned child saying, you know, my parents need this and we need to do it. And I thought, well, we don't need to do it. I need to do it with your parent, you know. And that can be difficult too, you know, especially if there's a hearing issue, a vision issue, or a mental issue.
Yeah, well, it was a blessing that we got it done when we did with my mom, you know.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of key, because let's face it, if you wait until they have dementia, it's not that you can't do documents, because you
Yes.
can, and I have, but the person does have to, the attorney has to feel like they can certify that the person understands what they're doing at the time
Right.
they're doing it.
Right.
And I would have people that, I might have represented them in something, and then they would say, well, I want to bring my mom in. She's got an old trust and we want to do blah, blah. And usually my first comment was, is her attorney still practicing?
Yeah.
That's the attorney you want to see,
Right.
because that's the person who has the baseline to understand capacity for that individual. So, it's, people hate to spend money on attorneys, and we will say that we charge X an hour, and it sounds highly exorbitant and awful, but it's not like you work a 40-hour week. If you're like me and you're self-employed, if I got 3 hours of billable time in any given day, it was a good day. And everything else is spent doing all the other things you do when you run a business. And trusts are going to run some money. I mean, I won't deny that. But if you have a properly drafted document,
you get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for. And it can be a relief and an aid to families, in ways that they can't anticipate.
I have experience with both.
Yes, you would.
Karen helped me with probate for Diana, and then she set up my own trust. So, yeah. I have a question about trust that a friend of mine, he only has a house. Mm-hmm. And she, instead of putting the house in the trust, she put it in transfer upon death.
That is a new type of deed, a newer, I should say. Many states have had it for years. California's only had it for about the last, 5, 10, not even 10 years. Depending on the situation, that can work. Your issue is, I would have been a perfect example. My mom and dad had one kid, me. My dad died almost 20 years before my mom. So it was just my mother and me, and there was never any question who was going to get what and who was going to be in charge of what. And that can be an answer. It's not always perfect. And especially in case of disability, it's not perfect, because a transfer on death is good if you're dead. But if you're disabled or have dementia or have had a stroke, and say the kid needs to sell the house or get a loan on the house or do something with the house, it's usually the sale part that could be a problem, more of a problem. To have assets for somebody, that gets a little more complex. But, even if you have that, you still should have a will. I mean, who knows? You might die because you get run over by Alec Baldwin on his way to court someday, and it was his fault, and there's a lawsuit with a bunch of money, and you never really know. There are all kinds of bizarre things that happen. I was in a very, very bad accident as a 22-month-old child, and it was a head-on collision type of thing, and literally 10 miles from and I was seriously injured. 10 miles from where that happened, Big Crosby got into a huge accident, and he'd been drinking, and he was at fault. And somebody got, some mammoth settlement out of that one. And of course, I got hit by a guy who didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, and, had multiple surgeries and whatnot, that there was not even any money to cover that. So, you never know. I had a client who was in an accident on the freeway, and she had a multi-million-dollar settlement, and she needed somebody to handle it. Pardon me?
How is that determined?
How is what determined?
Value of life.
Total aside, not my area of expertise, but the basic idea is they usually look to future earnings, current support, and that type of thing. I've had 2 clients that I really think there were righteous medical malpractice issues, but they were both over 65 at the time of the death, and neither had minor children or anybody dependent on them. So it was just, what's their future earnings? Their Social Security.
Really? Wow.
And it's going to cost more to hire medical professionals to do the testimony than it is than you'd get, as a settlement. So, But, the other thing is there is no such thing as common law in the state of California for common law marriage. And people will come in thinking that they have a common law claim as a same-sex couple because they've been together for umpteen years. You can be with your partner, as I have for, virtually almost 40 years now. And if you're not married, you're not married. And that counts for zip. Yeah.
Years ago, because Diane and I have been together over 40 years, we set up a CRET, charitable remainder
unit trust. Yeah.
Yeah, which apparently, the more I've gone into it at length, is when we both die,
Mm-hmm.
that trust has to go to some charity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, right now, I can change it at will,
Mm-hmm.
wherever it's to go, or Diane can. Either one of us can change to whom it would be distributed. But then the advantage of that I remember is if the trust actually earns money, not capital gain, but earns cash, I can take a percentage of that.
It depends on the drafting. I mean, generally, a charitable remainder unit trust is used for estates, and actually, this is worth mentioning too. We're having rush hour behind me here. For estates that would be subject to estate tax, and at the moment, those estates are 11 million and change value, and a lot of us. Again,
I lost track of.
Okay, what I'm saying is mostly the charitable remainder trusts were set up for people that there was an anticipation that there might be an estate tax burden upon their passing. So it's a way to shelter assets and then have them go to charity and have them not count as part of your taxable estate. And at the moment, I mean, back in the day when you did the CRUT, it used to be we could give away about $600,000, and anything over that, you're going to pay taxes on. There's going to be estate taxes assessed to the estate, and that number is now 11.4 or something million. I forget. It probably went up again this year. It may go back to 5 million. It's a moving target, and this is the thing that I'm going to say. With anybody who has a trust, anybody who has an estate that is sizable, and sizable, in California is relative. I mean, you can have a house that's in any place else would be a fixer-upper that might be worth $1 million out here. But depending on the size of the estate, the laws change. Estate tax is a federal scheme. We do not have our state does not tax the estate of a decedent currently, but it could at some point. That could change too. So, it's a moving target. And while you're alive, that's why having an attorney and staying in touch with the attorney and having a review every now and again is a great idea, because this stuff does change, and it can change dramatically. It changed dramatically when we went from 1 or 2 million up to 11 million that you could give away. And that makes a huge difference. We have other tax schemes called portability, meaning if I die, my partner, or my spouse, not my partner, it'd have to be my spouse, is able to take my 11 million that I could give away tax-free and add it to her 11 million. She can give away tax-free, and she could give away at her death 22 million, which isn't really an issue with me, but for some people it might be. But the bigger point is that this stuff does change, and you really do. You don't have to stay totally conversant about all aspects of the law, but if you are developing an estate of size, you really do need to pay attention, because I do have clients now that if this does revert to 5 million, they may well have an estate tax issue. And one way to avoid that is to set up a charitable remainder trust, which in essence shelters certain assets from taxation and allows you to give it to charity rather than the government, which, all things being equal, most of us would probably rather do.
Well, we were using it in a different way, in that it's a lump sum of money from which you can earn interest or whatever. And that lump sum of money had nothing to do with marriage.
No, I understand that, but it had to do with getting it out of your taxable estate, because that's the purpose. But that's not an issue that most people run into. So
I don't think we'd run into it today. It was.
You probably might not. You probably would have before, but again, you could again, because the tax code, as we know, has a way of changing.
Yes.
But any other particular death and taxes kind of questions that anybody's got?
Well, we just got away from last week. Went to a estate planning situation to review it, because we, through the years, had probably 4 or 5 different attorneys with this, and they're either retired or not there anymore for some reason. They're no longer available, so we thought we should reestablish.
Well, it is important, and I will just say just one thing in defense of attorneys. People will get highly agitated. I've had it happen too. They'd come in to see me, and bring this stack of paperwork that they had from whatever it was. And admittedly, I was not a fan of the 900-page trust. I always figured I had trouble having people read my 13 to 15 pages and not have their eyes roll up in the back of their head, let alone regurgitating the entire probate code in the document. But if somebody brought it to me and said, all I need to do is just change this, the reality is, if I make an amendment, I am also basically signing off on the validity of the rest of that god-awful document. And sometimes it was, or it was not totally in line with what we use today. And so often, if somebody came in and, I mean, literally, if they were just changing the name of the executor, I might go ahead and do it. But it's really common to say we're going to do what's called an amendment restatement, meaning that they're going to basically rewrite the document to incorporate your new changes. And that's done really for protection of the attorney, because you don't really want a malpractice suit on somebody else's document. And people are not necessarily happy about that, but any more than, let's face it. I mean, if Marge, you were in a position where somebody else had done the surgery and they said, well, all I want you to do is sign off on this, and you didn't either have ability to review everything thoroughly and know that whatever you were signing off on, there's no way you're going to do that, because it's your name is the last name on there, and if something goes wrong, guess who?
Well,
I'd rather get
in our case, we had several reasons to say, let's just redo the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where we are with most trust and estate documents. It's modification, especially many years down the road. It's probably a wiser move to just redo the entire document and start fresh, because it's less confusing for the people who administer it.
Well,
the other question I get is
the child involved is no longer 2.
Well, that's it. I mean, when they're
25,
young, yeah, well, that's it. When they're young, it's one set of circumstances. I have people that may have a child who has had drug issues at one point in their life and doesn't now, or somebody that was going to get money has now had a stroke or is disabled. And all those things have to be taken into account, because they present different challenges and different concerns. So, a semi-regular review or a life-changing event review is always good. And that's about all I know, too. Anybody else got anything else?
Any questions? This is good, really good. Thank you.
Well, thank everybody for their participation and their patience in listening to all this.
Well, taxes are always a confusing issue for me, and we're right in the middle of them. So
I'll tell you
what,
what,
I've ever filed taxes on time. I think
it can be a confusing issue for the people who do them, because believe me, it's not a one size fits all, and it's not one answer is correct, as you well know too, Tony. You call 3 tax professionals and you'll get 4 answers. It's a matter of interpretation, and that's why it's like medicine. Medicine is the practice of medicine.
Right.
Nothing is absolute for any of our fields, and we all apply it the best way we can, and you take your information and try to make an informed choice.
Yeah. So Tony, how many clients can you do in a day?
Well, for me personally, probably 2 or 3, but since I'm the lead counselor and what we're doing right now because of COVID is we'll accept, we have a easy up and tables outside of the senior center, and we take their documents in. They have to fill out an intake sheet to give us all the information, which is not always complete. So we have to finish that. We take their documents and then they sign releasing them to let us take them inside. So I'm doing a lot of running back and forth.
They don't go with their documents.
With documents, then I have to bring, once the return has been input and somebody else has reviewed it, then we have to have them sign it before we transmit to the IRS. So if I wasn't doing all that, we start at 1. I can do about 3, but these are not complicated. No, it's Social Security, a pension, maybe some interest. And there's not much interest right now, but so you know that they're not complicated. My own personal taxes, I don't even do them myself.
It used to take a while. I can attest to that.
It would take a while. But so, and I have about 3 or 4 people that are certified counselors. So we're probably doing 12 a day, 12 to 15 a day. And that's that's what the quality.
You donate your time for that?
Pardon?
Are you
I donate my, yes, it's all volunteer.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
that's
admire
really
you
neat.
for that.
And I just found out I have been doing this for 10 years. And every year I say this is the last year, but
I've heard
I
you say
keep-
that.
pardon?
I have heard you say that. Right?
You're a better person than I am, Tony Livingston, let me tell you.
Well, we'll see how long it goes. You know, the people that come for the most part are very appreciative.
Right.
And last year, because of COVID, you know, we were very limited on counselors, and many of them went to private tax preparers who ended up paying $300 to $400 for a very simple return.
Yeah.
And you know, you know, and I understand that the preparers had, you know, train and they have to make money. They have to pay for their office space and so forth. But, you know, there's plenty of places you can get it done free,
Yep.
you know, if you have the patience. Wait.
So, but I respect all of you and your careers and what you do. And I'm glad I chose the path I did, but it was, I was surprised he was so forthright with me, but he was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a doctor, I'm not a tax preparer, and I'm definitely not an attorney.
Well, in our day too, Diane,
Yeah.
there was limited careers, at
Very
least from our parents' perspective.
Yeah.
Mhm. Very much so.
And you can hear it in the interviews that people was teacher, secretary, or what was the third person? Their career, people bring it up that those were their choices.
Yeah.
So
Or
they-
airline
yours.
stewardess.
Airline.
Yeah, that's one my dad tried to talk me into. Like, no.
I don't think you were tall enough. I didn't have.
He had some connection somewhere.
Ah,
He didn't want you to raise avocados?
No,
No.
we were in oranges at that time.
yes.
I always think of the Livingston avocado.
Yeah,
Well, we
I
were,
miss them.
I sat so many times, my father, when I was young, had a back problem. And so he was the county sheriff, so I would drive him. So I spent a lot of time sitting in courtroom. And it was the sitting in courtroom that told me I didn't want to be in the law.
Right.
And
That's
it's-
why I did trusts and estates, because unless you screw up, you usually aren't in the courtroom.
No, I'm just saying, it was just, I had an opportunity to go to
complicated.
law, but I didn't.
In retrospect, I wouldn't have been good at it, so I respect all of you.
Well,
So do you have any questions before we close? Thank you, Karen, for being the moderator.
well, whatever that was, yeah. You're more than welcome, and thank everybody for participating.
And I'm going to move Diane just a little bit so you can see that that is a statue.
It is Scales of
Yeah.
Justice. There you go.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lovely.
If I do say so. And Tony, any closing comments or?
No, I thank you. I was, you know, it was very informative.
Yes,
Indeed.
I agree with that.
Very much so.
Thank you, Sherry.
I agree. Very informative.
So thank you. We'll close. This is a legacy project. Just imagine 50 years from now, somebody listening to what we're saying about checking accounts or
What are they?
Yeah.
That's
checking
right.
accounts. They don't even know.
Probably not.
So thank you for being part of this. We appreciate it.
We really
Most
do.
welcome.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
means a lot.